here on Build and Blaze TV. Welcome all. Yesterday we have a number 9 and goal number 10. And we're going to talk about today inclusion in Radia Funna, which you know already since we were talking for 9 days. But I'm going to introduce her again. So she's a futurist ex-human theory that is going. Hopefully, she's going to talk about. Say hi and good morning to Radia Funna. Good morning, Radia.
Good morning, Maza. Today for day 10 show. My goodness, that look. I'm excited for our day 10 show today. We are supposed to talk about SDG 10. So I'm going to kick off the conversation today with SDG 9. And then we have an amazing guest, Paula, Regina, Raigosa, Garcia, who is the co-CEO of a little bit about, so let's start to SDG 9, SDG infrastructure. And my goal today is to spend a little time talking to you about what that SDG 9 is. What does SDG 9 mean? Innovation and infrastructure. One, for us to blaze and why we're here. Simply because actually we work very innovation and infrastructure. The organization actually came to being. Beacon's founder was working in an organization where I worked with different companies on concern infrastructure. And more about that, I realized that these connected. And in my mind, I started with a whole new world of technology. What the fourth industrial revolution started in about 2000. So we were about a decade in. And disrupted even things like blockchain mentioned, just think about all these different technologies and what they were doing to the different organizations that I call disruptive or disrupt to that disruption. It was all around, if you take Amazon as a fantastic example, Amazon started out as what felt like it was going to be an online bookstore. And it impacted other bookstores, huge bookstores, for example, because they used to have some level. Now, I don't know that anybody would think of Amazon as a bookstore, organization that sells everything, because they do. And that was a great example of the erosion. I almost want to say a company stayed in its industry, not where it started seeing a different source of the issue versus the symptom. We were looking at not just a disruption, in fact, not even a disruption. It was we're evolving with machines that I started in the past, right? More and more, these machines were becoming these huge expectations of the people in our organizations. Build and Blaze started working both in organizational strategy and figuring out how that organizational strategy was being impacted, as well as working in innovation and figuring out what was going on with innovation. And we are now looking at industry. Both we realized that innovation wasn't just a set of tools. You brought innovational strategy. Actually, we were talking to SDG said was that by technology, it's difficult to have decent. And I would say the same thing, obviously, for SDG 9. I mean, it seems more obvious because we have innovation. It's difficult for us to have the industry without technology. Pass this over to my friend Mayra. Okay, looks like we are talking hopefully until we get Mayra back. But let me go to that third piece, infrastructure, and let's talk a little bit about infrastructure, and maybe we can see in a little bit. I would simply say what the government. Mayra is here, so I don't want to go too far into infrastructure. Let's. Okay, so we have innovation. Speaking of technology, challenging day. Let's put it. I think we're dealing with so many technological challenges. It is multi-country, not the most apparently, that we can have these conversations with Mexico, and it seems like technological perspective. So I'm at this point, the conversation that we were supposed to have was with our, perhaps we can bring in in Mexico, and etc. And I'll have her. But what I would get Paula here, organization has created dolls for us, dolls that represent. We have Professor Radia two, the number two, who that represent the SDGs, as in the ambassadoress. And then we have a bunch of other dolls representing the SDGs from SDG 1 to SDG 17. So I'm hoping that we can get Paula in on this conversation here, specifically an element of it, of course, to SDG 9, which we were just talking about. We were talking about innovation, about industry, about infrastructure. But I would love for her to pick this up on the other side, which is that SDG on reduced inequalities. But before she does, I'd ask her, Paula, if you are here with us, I would love for you to start out by just telling us a little about you and a little about Labor, and how you got into the world of what you do.
Yes, I can hear you, but well, if I start about talking about Labor, Labor started as a school project, and well, we were a group of architects and design and industrial design students. We have this aim that between 6 months we have to create or design something for a community that was near Querétaro. That's where I live. And this community is in Santiago Mexquitlan. It's an autonomy community. So during these 6 months, we have 2 months of investigations, 1 month of creation. No, sorry, and the last month of prototyping the idea. So while we were there, we realized, of course, a lot of problems in the community, social problems, really low opportunities, low salaries, injustice, a lot of things. And while we were discussing what to do or what to design, we realized that we were not given the right thought about how to reduce or how to solve a problem, because we were actually just focusing on the problems. And that's when we changed the way we think, and we start focusing more on the opportunity. So this community is an indigenous community, and has a lot of techniques that, like, yes, a lot of techniques that, well, they have these techniques for long, and a few people know about these techniques and how actually, when we find this and we say, okay, this is a treasure, so why we didn't know about this? So that's when Labor burn, and that's where we try to, like, our mission is to show not only the crafts, so we show more than that. We show the knowledge all of these people have, because that's the real value of it. So every time we go to Labor, well, the thing is, in Labor we invite people from the cities, and they get to know these artisans into their home. So the artisan actually, like, open the doors of their house, and they teach their technique. And so the people that go there get to know the community, the culture, the artisans, the technique. So every time they go there, they actually get so full of this culture that they bury in the ground. And now what we try is to show it, because it's really a treasure. So that's what Labor does right now.
That sounds fascinating. I'm hoping you can hear me. Um, I have a thought or a question on. Okay, wonderful. I have a thought or a question. I mean, first of all, I love what you do. Love what you do. And also I love the cultural significance, because I think what tends to happen is that some of these artisan techniques are forgotten, especially as we go into, speaking of industry today, as we go into the next industrial revolution and the next industrial revolution, we leave behind all these techniques that were unique to our culture. So in response to what you're saying, I have a question for you. As you look at labor, would you say that your main goal, have you found that your main goal is to rediscover these techniques? And what do you think the biggest value is of rediscovering them?
I think the most important thing is that these people have this way of thinking. They actually think cycle. They don't think like you were saying about the industrial revolution and all the problems we have right now with that, with all the trash, all the problems we have. So I think that, as I told you, people in labor have this way of thinking cycle. So everything they do, it doesn't end. It's recycle, recycle, recycle. And about the techniques, I think we're not. We are, of course, we are discovering it. But further from that, I think we are actually showing them, because we as people that live in the cities, we don't know about it and we don't know the value about it. And not only about the crafts, also about the way of living. And I think what we try to do is to show how these people do it, and to actually understand that they are masters in what they do, and that we have a lot of things to learn from them, because the way they live, the way we think, the way they value things is what we are missing nowadays in our social lives and in our way of living. So I think that's like the most uh, important thing that labor does.
I like that a lot, and I like that you use the word value, because I think we have lost a lot of our value in our current lives. I think the way in which we value things has changed in our societies. We value things that are fairly new. The concept of money, for example, is a fairly new concept in humanity. We value that in order for us to live our lives. We don't have a choice, right? We have to make money, we have to work. And it does change our value system. And a lot of us don't like how it makes us feel on the inside. But we feel like we are left without a choice, although it was humanity's choice to get to this place. I actually think that there are two elements of value. So when you say that, that makes me think of. The first is exactly what you're saying, and that is that concept of recycling as well. We call it recycling, but we all live in a cycle. And I think it's really interesting when you look at that cycle as part of the way in which we manufacture, our manufacturing process. And I think that there's a lot to learn, and would love your thoughts on what we can learn as we're looking at the fourth industrial revolution, and we're looking at yet again another set of new technologies. But what is very interesting about today's technologies is that they're exponential. And the exponentiality, and that's one of the things that I worked on my theory, goes beyond the machines. I believe that the exponentiality is impacting us because we are co-evolving as human beings with these machines, and we ourselves are becoming more and more exponential. And what that means to me is that we are also we're being imprinted by things like software code, but we are also imprinting one another, because as the software code learns from each and every one of us, it turns around and imprints what it's learned on the others. Even though we may have never met one another, we are beginning to change one another's behavior. There's another piece of it, which is that digital realm that we all live in. our Facebook, our Twitter, our LinkedIn, it presents a completely different set of us that are living a whole different life that it may or may not be directly connected to what's happening in our real life. Some of us may have never left our basement, but on our LinkedIn or our Twitter or our Facebook, we are global travelers and we influence millions of people. And I think it's very critical to note that. And when you interject things like the Sustainable Development Goals, whose goal it is to serve as an action framework for us to solve the globe's greatest problems, our greatest challenges. The challenge we're talking about with you today is reduced inequalities. I'll finally get to my question, but there are two things that it makes me think of. The first is your thoughts on recycling as a result of learning how to work cyclically. You know, like what you're saying, they think in cycles. They think, you know, as they manufacture, it goes around and around over and over and over again. And as we are dealing with climate change and all these climate uprisings, what are your thoughts when you're comparing this kind of cyclical thinking to what we're dealing with today? One. And then the second thing is I'd like us to start making this interesting connection with what you're doing with fair wage and how you're thinking about reduced inequalities from that point of view.
Can you please repeat the first one?
No problem at all. So the first thing I said was, can you hear me? Okay, so the technological challenges again. So the first thing I said was, how would you look at, you were talking about how with think in cycles and how it doesn't end, right? They don't do a need that, okay, let's start all over again. How in your mind, how can this impact the way in which we do business today, the way in which we manufacture? Are there lessons that we can learn?
Yes, totally. I think, for example, in all the if we compare to any industry, in industry we have a lot of they call it trash or things that they don't find a use, and that's like the point. If I compare to how these people in the community think, from them, there's nothing is trash. Everything they have, they actually finding a purpose. For example, if they have if they cook something, all the food that rest, they give it to the animals, or they use it to plant more corn, or they actually find they find a purpose to what we call trash and what industry call trash. Uh, and that's how I think from my experience, how they find this solution to all the remaining things from all the process they have.
Thank you. I think that's a very useful lesson. The other piece of my question was, today we're talking reduced inequalities. And I believe that some of what you do addresses fair wage practices, because when we go to some of these more indigenous practices and we produce from those, we find that often the way they're able to sell, and you can speak to this much better than me, is through markets and that sort of thing. So I would be curious to know what your thoughts are. I would be curious to know what your thoughts are on, you know, fair wage practices and how you're bringing the people that you're working with into what you're considering fair wage. Like, how does that process work?
Labor, Uh, what we do is that the artisans that work with us, they earn up to 50% more than what they usually do when working in the field, and they get to do what they love and in better conditions. When we were there, we get to know that a lot of people go out of their community to industries to find to any, well, mainly industries, and they actually earn really low. So they earn really low, and besides from that, they actually leave their families alone, their children alone. So their children get to this, they get really vulnerable to violence, to drugs, to a lot of problems. So while we were there, we realized that we need to give them this opportunity of working, of course, that they have a little bit more money, and they actually, so that they earn more, and that they really like what they do, and that they don't have to leave their families, because they actually don't like to leave their families, and they don't actually like to go to cities to live there. They love their community. They love living next to the nature. So why don't give them the opportunity to work whenever they like, in the conditions they like, and earning more than what they earn in the industry? That's the question that you are asking, right?
Yes, it is. And I really like this connection you made between fair wage practices, that connection between running to cities and looking for work versus empowerment within one's own community. And I think you're absolutely right. I think all of us who have had, in my, looks like I'm frozen, so I hope you can hear me. Hold on once. Okay, can you actually hear me? Or are we all frozen?
No, no, I can hear you.
Okay, good. I don't know. But I think all of us who have come from, I'm a first generation American, for example, and my family had to leave their places of birth for opportunity, not because they adored where they were going, but because the best opportunities existed at homes. And what that does is, I think personally, that it teaches a man, it gives a man fish in essence, right? They can go out, they can build something, and maybe they can even send some fish back home. But it doesn't empower the community for any kind of long-term growth. And I think that it would be fantastic if more and more, as what you're looking at, more and more these fair wage practices start to go into some of these indigenous communities, the sorts of things that we are doing in the cities, manufacturing business. And as you rightly said, they cannot move forward. They cannot build out their communities. So what I wanted to do was, I know today it's a little awkward because we don't have Mayra as part of this conversation. But I wanted to get from you final thoughts as you think about reducing inequalities and you think about what we're talking about today, SDG 10. What would you say the role was of fair wage practices, doing what you love, you said that as well, rediscovering these older techniques that work? What would you say, even like that's the way and not creating waste? What do you think the role is of all these things in reduced inequalities?
I'm sorry, but like because of the line on.
No worries at all. What would you say, let's simplify it a little bit, what would you say the role of fair wage practices, instead of me asking every question I can think of, because we could talk forever on this, it's such an interesting topic, but what would you say the role of fair wage practices within these indigenous communities is in reducing inequalities in SDG 10?
I think that this fair wage, it's of course it's really important because they have to, of course, have money, believe in this society that works around money. So of course they do need money. But besides from that, I think like the most important thing to reduce inequalities, it's actually be empathic and get this opportunity of knowing how these people get to be what they are right now. So whenever you are empathic with someone, you actually understand their situation, understand how they live, why they live like that, and if we actually get to know someone, you like this. Um, you hear me? Sorry. Hello.
I can hear you. You're not alone.
Perfect. I'm sorry. So, like the main thing for me, besides this fair wage, is be empathic with someone else. And I think labor, like the heart of labor, is that like whenever any assistant go there, he or she became empathic to the indigenous people, and actually they get partners because they get like the assistant can ask the teacher anything, of course, that they want to answer, but they really get this empathic situation, and I think that that's when this inequality gap reduces.
I think that's a beautiful it's a beautiful way to look at it. It makes so much sense. And in summation, or in summary, what you're saying in essence is having access, having direct relationships with these quote unquote indigenous people that are us builds that empathy. We get to know each other. It builds that partnership. It gives us knowledge and knowledge transfer and sharing. And being able to also pay fair wages drives up this quotient so that we do have reduced inequalities. Reduced inequalities because they are paid appropriately. Reduced inequalities because there is a greater empathy that leads to greater partnership, and in essence, leads to a greater understanding of one another. So I think we have definitely gained in the way in which you have talked about these people. Before you go, and hoping that before you go, here's what I would love to end on a really nice note, because labor has been a fantastic organization to this 17 at 17 initiative. And for those of you who are joining us for the first time, the 17 at 17 initiative is our 17 days of SDGs. We are walking through the sustainable development goals, one goal at a time, over 17 days. We started out with poverty on day 1, no poverty. We went to zero hunger, SDG 2, on day 2. We went to good health and well-being on SDG 3 on day 3. Then we did education, SDG 4 on day 4. Then we followed that up with gender equality, SDG 5 on day 5. Plenty of SDGs. And then we did clean water and sanitation, SDG 6 on day 6. Then affordable and clean energy, SDG 7 on day 7. And finally, decent work and economic growth, SDG 8 on day 8. Yesterday was day 9. SDG 9 is industry, innovation, and infrastructure. And today is day 10, SDG 10, reduced inequalities. So I think that as we have walked through these SDGs, Labor, for each SDG, you guys created a doll for us. A doll that has become an ambassador per SDG. And then we have the professor of all SDGs, which is the bigger doll, Professor Radia too. So I would love, before we close and go over to our friend Mayra, Tell us a little bit about the making of the SDG doll.
Well, the dolls are made by an artisan. She's called Vicky. She's our artisan of gastronomy. So like we asked her and she was like, yes, of course. She was really excited about participating in this in the with you. So yeah, like what we did is that each doll has the color of each goal, and that's what I can say about it. Like I really thank you for asking us for being ambassadors of all the goals. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing your talent with us. Thank you for sharing your talented artisans with us and allowing us to have these amazing representations of the goals. Right now, the dolls are still in Mexico. They're hanging out with Mayra and they're helping us walk through the goals. At the end of 17 at 17, they'll make their way to the US and they will continue to be the ambassadors for the goals over the next year while we explore. They are little explorers. While we explore each goal and build upon our knowledge in our goal to enter the 10th year, actually 10 years from the goals are supposed to be met by 2030. We would have 10 years. We will have 10 years in 2020. So we are hoping that these dolls will help us as we enter into 2020 and help give us more knowledge about the goals and help bring more people along so that we can meet them. So again, thank you so much. We appreciate your time today. Any last words? Don't be a stranger. Hang out with us. We hope to continue to work with you and with Labor. But thank you very much. Thank you for taking the time.
Oh, thank you. And we all invite you to live an experience with us in this community, Santiago Mexquititlan. So be welcome to call us or to talk to us, and we really invite you to come, and so that you get to know all of these artisans, all of this community, and of course all of this knowledge.
Thank you for that wonderful invite. We look forward to doing that. And thank you again for joining us on the show. You have an amazing day, and we will see you soon. Take care. Bye-bye. Okay, guys, so we're going to try again to zip over to our friend Mayra and try to close the show to us. And I'm going to flip rejoin.
Do you hear me now? Listening carefully to this conversation, I think it was wonderful, many things. So I just want to keep it simple, because the things social entrepreneurs are doing, Inequalities, is doing I do artisans in these citizens from the city 10 by like selling craft in responsibility fair wage. When you go and see these people and you see the way they work, the way the government or as a community, you also keep these people. How do I give them a country? And at the same time, a good way to go when you not just realize that it's poor, but also saying before in term, that's knowing them that work.
With you 100% doing very, very, and I think this is a problem, right? A problem where we're losing some of the method, the essence of who we are at the four industrial revolutions. And I did that as you start out agrarian economy, very close to us, of factories, and they isn't their home, that doesn't involve their families. And as families, you'd have a father, a mother, their kids. But the factories were not conducive to that. Those conditions were terrible for especially women expecting. And so what that started to create was this artificial divide, and it started to create into things like what we talk about now with gender parity, even the education, it just, she's doing what Labor is doing, is thinking not just about rediscovering the way we did work, but thinking about how we pay a fair wage to those people that are in that space, the artisans, the masters, and bringing in students to learn. And then one thing I also love, cyclical piece. Everything has, yes, everything has a use. I love that piece. I thought that work is, we're looking at, the UN just issued a code red for climate. I think that was yesterday. And as you're looking at our challenges in the fourth industrial revolution, challenges that were built up over time. They started in the first, and they went to the second, and they were signs we more trash, actually. we can cover the planet than we did before, given the level. But then at the same time, if you look at the flip end of it, and wouldn't it be organizations like that, like what you said, what these social entrepreneurs are doing, wouldn't it be interesting if you step into their connect with these technologies, with these processes? I said earlier, when I was talking earlier, that when you're looking at the fourth industrial revolution, you see a lot of to bring in technology. No, they need technology to succeed by bringing in the tools to the platform that these technologies can be. Like, they're not really innovation and technology pieces stop at middle management. So that the organizational strategy, and as you look at reduced inequalities, it's just the other side of the coin. These labor practices for artisans and things like that is to them at the moment. Folks cannot even live off of creating their dolls. But coming up with a fair wage for what we're calling in their role and make a change, the societal makeup, it changes a lot more. So I know I got too passionate and I might have talked too long. But hopefully at some point I touched on what you wanted to hear. Mayra?
You did, Radia. You did indeed. And I just want to continue with what you are saying. But they actually don't need to have like a big machine. Maybe if they start to produce more, maybe they do. But at some point, industry about with engaging with technology, this unfair because they look for the. I do actually think artisans working, they're also teaching us there's another way to save the planet. Have to be really tech, but maybe. But they, as Paula was saying, they use all what doing these cycles, like they use all they have. I mean, if they have waste of food, they give it to the animals. They are using what they have. They just keep it simple. And sometimes I think that's the way we have to go with this for industry, but with a fair wage, for example, right?
I agree. I agree. And I think simplicity is key a lot of times, right? I think a lot of the complications to move forward as we're trying to solve problems that in essence have been solved before. So I think that the our that we are encountering now, the question is, how do we start to be able to say, for example, what Paula was saying from a labor, to be able to say there are artisans out there that are doing a great job of this. Artisans, how do we integrate that into the future of scenarios that we are creating? If we're looking at the future of factories, or we're looking at the future of different processes better. And are we paying enough attention, particularly as we're looking at several, we're looking at different countries in the world, are we paying enough attention to the world's best? That sort of thing I think does make a difference. So yeah, that's kind of we wrap up here, is to touch on infrastructure, because the reason I did that is because infrastructure is so tied Infrastructure is everything from, police, or water, running water and systems, electricity, so that element of industry, that element of innovation is critical. And so too is it critical to things like reduced inequalities. And that's one of the reasons why I wanted to leave that for last, is I feel like infrastructure is foundational. Before we can even aspire to reducing inequalities, or it's in life, it's the way in which we live, what is considered okay for us to live with and live through. And whether it is with our innovation and we want to do something different for our communities or within our work, or industry, whatever the case may be, infrastructure remains foundational, because it's everything from flushing toilets that'll allow for better sanitation. We talked about sanitation a few days ago with SDG 6, to electricity and running water that will help raise people from poverty, that'll help fuel zero hunger. Really, the role of infrastructure cannot be stressed enough. Extremely drive that home for a few minutes before we close here. Mayra?
Yes, Radia, thank you. Actually, you know what? In the next few days, I'm going to give a conference to youth about goal number 9, that is innovation, infrastructure, and industry. So, so I think this is a good opportunity, because I'm talking to you since Build and Blaze and you are doing and working really tight with this. What's the challenge for this youth? Because we're talking about infrastructure, and of course, as you said, we're thinking about the governments. They need to build roads in order from people. They also have to think about a way of mobility that is with clean energy, because the situation here in Mexico is like they sometimes they build everything in a rush and they don't planify it really well. Querétaro, where Paula lives, actually is one of these. When talking about infrastructure, they have their industries on one side, on the opposite of side of where people lives, but they are also building schools near these industries. So people, they don't have to go all the way around, leave their kids and then go to work. So they have the kids close, they have the industry, and they actually build a hospitals really close. The challenge here is like for the next generations, that there are coming engineers and they're going to be one day governors or representatives. They have to think about not like we are a growing city and we have to build everything quick, but like what is better for our society, what is better for the planet. And here it goes my question: in which challenges, when we are talking about goal number 9, do you think a youth has to focus?
That's a fantastic question to end on. I think when we're looking at goal number 9, we find that there's a lot of energy in innovation from the youth. There's a lot of a desire to do things their own way, if you will. I mean, they come in with youthful exuberance, but they also come in with just a different point of view for a very long time and may have lost that perspective of new. And I would say my challenge to the youth is empathy, and that's what Paula was talking about earlier, is allowing it. I always say that you must know the rules before you seek to break them. And I think sometimes in innovation, we lose that first part, which is what rule are we breaking and why? And we head out for an are the way they are. It doesn't mean things cannot, should not, or will not approach change with a knowledge of what is happening right now, why is it the way it is, and how would we change it, why would we innovate blindly? And sometimes it is the reason why that innovation fails. So in a word, I would say empathy. I would say 9 industry, innovation, infrastructure, walk into that with young. Sometimes we feel like I was the smartest, most knowledgeable person, and my parents were just old fogies that didn't understand what was going on, and I got everything. And it took me a while. It took me getting to be closer to an old fogey to go, okay, wait a minute. It's what we call wisdom. And with some openness, some ability to be empathetic. We want to innovate, but we are these views but our own. So that's what the challenge is. I think the challenge is be empathetic, willing to flex. Mayra?
I just love our show. You say change with knowledge. I think that's the key word today. Change with knowledge, and that's something Labor does, and that's something Build and Play does. And I do believe we at Social Drammers we're trying to do change with knowledge. So I think that's the key. That's our closing Radia for today, and I really appreciate talking today with these guys. I was showing you because Radia was telling you about the ambassadors, and I have some here and some here. These are our ambassadors that Labor gave us, and we actually really thank. And as Paula was saying, Radia, she hopes you can come to Mexico so you can make your own Labor Maria doll.
I can't wait. I can't wait to join you.
Everything for today. Yay!